A growing scrutiny of the campaign spending commission after the lieutenant governor admitted her team didn't have properly balanced books 4 years ago. Critics say the commission should have caught the error. Lynn Kawano shows us who is defending the agency and why.
Campaign spending has a staff of 5. 50 years ago, they had a staff of 5. But in that time, there's been a huge increase in candidates, offices, and donors. Follow the money. The Hawaii Campaign Spending Commission keeps watch over hundreds of people running for office statewide and their contributors, with a small staff that was thrust into the spotlight recently after Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke admitted to clerical errors in her accounting from 2022. That case is now part of separate investigations at the state attorney general's and CSC offices.
If campaign spending had been checking these things, they would have probably found it a year or two earlier, which could have been fixed.
State Senator Donovan Delacruz says CSC needs to do more to help staffers navigate the often confusing filing process and avoid violations.
But they're not actually helping with compliance. In addition to that, most of us, at least 90% of us, have volunteer treasurers.
The agency's director says they do offer assistance with compliance,
entering campaign finance activity,
including short online videos on various topics, plus virtual and in-person training opportunities.
Step-by-step processes on how you would file reports using the computer. But of course, the main value is you can call us. And if you call us, we will answer your questions.
CSC also maintains a publicly accessible database so the candidates, journalists, and watchdog groups can find discrepancies.
And this is a commission that is tasked with an enormous set of responsibilities to, check and make sure that, there aren't unnecessary errors, and particularly to help first-time candidates, because we want people to run.
But H&N political analyst Colin Moore says longtime incumbents should be able to hire professionals to manage the books.
You can make a distinction between someone running a first-time candidate, running for House, with a volunteer treasurer, and someone who's a veteran politician running for statewide office who really does have a deep understanding of how this works.
That it's so unfair for this to be put back on the CSC. The lawmakers control the funding. They control how much resources the CSC has to make sure that campaigns are following the laws.
Lawmakers did approve 2 new positions for the agency last year to hire an elections assistant and, for the first time, a full-time investigator.
We always need more help, particularly because with every election we have over 100 new candidates.
The 2 new positions are still moving through the Human Resources Department. Once that's done, the hiring process can start. I'm Lynn Kawano, Hawaii News Now.